I understand what you're doing. It's necessary for people to have the ability and the rhetoric, to be able to defend themselves and their beliefs.
I think you misunderstand what I'm doing.
I got to make this one point. You can clarify, but this is the point that I want to make. There is no win in pounding and beating up someone that's intellectually dishonest with himself and everybody sees it. There's no win in that. A lot of times it's just a separation of, okay, you guys are over there and we're over here. We can still interface, and I can go, play water volleyball and kind of whatever. I don't care.
Well, I'm not talking about that. So you keep bringing it back to, okay, here's everybody's political stance. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about somebody who is directly trying to get you to engage in a certain behavior. Maybe they use political stuff as a tool to do that. Maybe they lift up their shirt and show their cesarean section scar to try to guilt you. I mean, whatever it is, and we haven't gone into how do you know where the line, how to be on one side or the other of this line. But there is a way to interact with somebody which is dominating. There's a way to interact with somebody that's rational. Not that the person is rational, but that the interaction is rational, right? And that there is a certain style that people will engage in where they pretend to be rational, but in reality they're dominating, which is how I define manipulation or sophistry. And most people don't see it, and they allow their behavior to be controlled by it. Now, again, like I said, we could apply this to the political level of things, but that's not the core issue of what I'm going on here. Let me tell you another story. And this is with a friend, someone who I thought would be in my tribe. So this is after I came back from Europe. I'd been a poor vagabond for 2.5 years, and I literally had $5 in my pocket when I came back. And my clothes were in shreds. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a job. I didn't have anything, right? And a friend of mine who I used to train Aikido with, I did Aikido for a long time. I was part of a Shinto shrine community, strangely enough. And in fact, I do think this is pertinent, is that I was heavily involved in Shinto.
Sounds like you've been seeking truth for a while.
I was heavily involved in Shinto for a while, and I actually lived and worked at the shrine where I did Aikido, and this friend of mine had also done the same thing. And so I want to emphasize, if we want to talk about tribal, me and him really had a similar difficult experience that very, very few other people had. So, I mean, just in terms of our connection there was actually very, very strong. So I come back, and this is 2013, the end of 2013, which was like 5 minutes after Initiative 502 passed in Washington State, which is legalized weed, woo! Right? So every stoner and his dog was in the process of trying to get into the weed business. And I'm back. He went to school. Ironically enough, it was Evergreen State College, which is the one where they had the baseball bats during like the 2016 election with the pink-haired freaks like chasing people off who were white. That camp, that's where he learned his business stuff. But side note, he calls me and he's like, "Hey, we're starting an I-502 growing and processing operation because you weren't allowed to be a grower, a processor, and retail. You can only be 2 out of the 3. And the law requires that we have a technician on the in the ownership. And because, Dylan, you have a degree and you have laboratory experience, I used to be a lab tech at an oil refinery, you are technically a technician. If I give you 3%, will you just put your name on the board?" I'm like, I would like to be involved in this. This sounds actually pretty cool. Ironically, I can't have anything to do with marijuana. I freak out and have psychotic episode, but I don't have any problem with anybody else using it, right? So he lived in Seattle. I was a bit north of Seattle, and so I move in with him and his buddy. And what they did is they had started a general landscaping and general contracting business in order to kind of be the funding vehicle for this greater idea of this I-502 weed business. And I was doing slave labor, as I like to call it, right? Just manual hard work. And my friend was more the business side, and his buddy was more of the, like, the foreman, let's get the job done side. And so it was a good mix. And at some point in this story, the guy, the foreman guy, got seriously injured in a crazy, violent accident. Right. Don't need to go into it. And he was taken out of commission for a while because his leg was really, really, really messed up. Now, my friend suddenly has to run both sides, which, I mean, that sucks because who would want to be in that position? So now I'm going to him as the foreman. And remember, I'm staying with him, right? So we've got a lot of time to interact. And even though I'm not an owner on this landscaping general contracting side, did I say landowner? Business owner. I'm not a part owner of the landscaping business side. I feel committed because I know this is part of the general goal of this bigger business. And so every day I'm communicating with him. Okay, are we doing this? Are we doing that? Are we doing this? Let's get this done. Let's get that done. And without fail, every single day, whatever we talked about doing, we would get to the job site and he would immediately start doing something else. And I was like, okay. And he wouldn't tell me anything. He would just go off and start doing something else. And this happened for a few days. And finally I approached him and it would also be stuff like, hey, Dylan, I need to get started at 7:30 tomorrow morning. And I'm like, okay, boom. I was ready at 7:30 tomorrow morning. He rolls out at 8:45, not acknowledging the fact that he's an hour and a quarter late from what he told me to be there at, right? So at some point, I take him aside and I'm like, look, I'm not going to say his name. I'll make up a fake name. Look, John, I want to talk to you because I'm struggling a little bit here because I feel like I'm not getting the updated information about what we're going to do. And he walked away from me. Just turned around and walked away from me. And I was like, that was really weird. So a few minutes later, he comes over because I was working. And he said, I'm going to go get lunch. And I'm like, I'm going to come with you to go get lunch. So we jump in the car and go to get lunch. And I bring it up again. I'm like, look, man, I want to see this to be successful. I want to do whatever. I feel like, we talk about things, it doesn't happen. And then you go off and do something else. And basically, I'm not getting accurate information about what we're doing because you're the boss, right? I'm not the boss. You are. And he got super defensive. And he started saying things like, why are you asking me to micromanage you? I'm trying to roll with the punches and you can't handle figuring out what's going on. I'm like, I'm not asking you to micromanage me. I'm like, can you just, like, if we agree to do this and you do that, can you just tell me that we're shifting gears? I just, like, I want to help. I want to be a part of helping, right? And he would just simply not engage in the conversation about my concern. It was all just this defensive stuff. And so, I mean, it kind of, it was starting to get a little warmer. Nothing crazy happened at that point. And we got home that night, and I said, look, can I get the day off tomorrow? Because I'd worked like 9 days straight, and I just needed a break. And I was also processing, like, what had happened that day. So the next day, he goes to work because he's the boss. He doesn't have a choice. He's got to get the stuff done. He comes back in the evening. He walks into the door, and he's like, hey, Dylan, can I talk to you in 30 minutes? And I'm like, well, wonder what this is going to be about. But that was sarcastic. And I was like, sure. So 30 minutes go by, and we sit in the living room, and he sits down, and the whole story was leading up to this point. He sits down, and he says, okay, Dylan, I could tell that you really have something on your mind. You can go ahead and start. Now, this is after my experience with Edward and the light bulb going off, and I'm putting more and more of these ideas together, right? And I'm like, full stop. You asked to talk to me. And he said, no, you got a lot on your mind. Go ahead and start. And I said, no, you asked to talk to me. What do you want to talk about? And I don't remember how many times that went back and forth, but eventually he's like, fine. Like that. I'll start. He said, you are perceiving that I'm giving you inaccurate information. That's the problem. Now, again, something you may have caught what happened there. Maybe you didn't. Maybe your listeners did. Maybe they didn't. I said, no, you are giving me inaccurate information. That's the problem. And then this went back and forth, which is, you are perceiving that I'm giving you inaccurate information. No, you are giving me inaccurate information. This went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then finally he shouted it. He's like, you are perceiving that I am giving you inaccurate information. And at that point, I'm like, I quit. I'm not putting up with this. I'm out. And the last thing he said was, oh, I mean, you can see the shock on his face when I said that. He's like, you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to do that. Now, there's
sounds like he read a book.
What's that?
Sounds like he read a book. You know, I've seen this kind of stuff before, and he went to therapy class of, you know, the Dylan school of how do you deal with whatever, you know. I feel it. So
there's three things I want to unpack there. And remember, I prefaced this on, I thought this guy was in my tribe. I really thought we were on the same tribe. We were similar politically. We were similar, experience sort of thing, right? And the first thing was this move of asking me to talk and then saying, okay, you could start. That's a power move of him trying to control when I get to speak and when I don't. The second part was this, you perceive that blah, 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 blah. If you listen to part 3 of my series on intellectual self-defense, which is the chain of responsibility, I go over that this is an odd, like when someone starts talking like you perceive, or it's just your opinion, or blah, 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 whatever, that's like an immediate 13 red flags need to go off in your mind, because what they're doing is they're actually changing the form of the argument. Because my argument is whether or not the information is bad. If he says you're perceiving that the information is bad, and that contains all the words in my argument, right? Perceiving information is bad. Okay, we're talking about the same thing. If I didn't catch it, I have just tacitly agreed that the issue isn't whether or not I'm getting information. The issue is my perception. Meaning, at any point in the conversation, if I, in quotes, prove my point, if I provide the facts and the arguments to win the argument, he has a get out of jail free card to go back and just lean back and go, well, that's just your perception. That's just your perception. That's just your perception. Your perception. Because if it's just my perception, he does not need to take it as something that is a reason for him to change his behavior. He does not have to take himself as responsible for what the thing that I'm putting on the table. Because at the core, all of our behavior is dictated around what we believe that we're responsible for, with the subset of, if I can convince you not to hold me accountable for what I'm responsible for, I can manipulate you. So if when he says this, it's your perception, it's your perception, it's your perception, what he's doing from the beginning is setting the stage that ultimately he's not responsible for anything that I say because it's my perception. Then the third thing was when I said I quit. He's like, oh, you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to do that. Even at the end, when I'm like, okay, I disengage from your control completely. I had a legitimate reason to be partially under his control, which is he was the boss under this certain relationship that we had. I am disengaging from that. And he says, oh, you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to do that. Like, yeah, I know I'm allowed to do that. I don't need like your permission or validation or anything like that. Right. He was still trying to control the interaction even after I disengaged from it. So there's a lot of points I want to make with this, but
well, let me inject here a little bit. Let me
hold on. I started with family. I'm moving on to friends, and even more importantly, a friend that I thought was in my tribe is able to be a chameleon to manipulate me with the idea that, well, we're on the same side, so we should be agreeing.